This is Dr. Dennis Bielfeldt, and I'm the president of the Institute of Lutheran Theology. And this is the last lecture that I'm going to be doing here, short little lecture on the development of the Old Academy, Middle Platonism, and Neoplatonism. If you're finding this on the internet, this video, we're doing this because we believe very deeply that to understand Christian theology deeply, we must understand the philosophical conceptuality and the presuppositions that underlay much of that theology. So where do we go to understand this philosophical conceptuality? Well, we go to the intellectual centers here. And we've talked about this in the School of Alexandria and Athens. Now here we have a thinker by the name of Proclus. Last time we talked about Porphyry, Iamblichus, and Plotinus. Proclus is perhaps, he's at the end of the line, right? And so just think of this. He dies in 485 AD. And Plato establishes his school. We have Aristotle there, Speusippus, Xenocrates, and all of these guys. That begins now around 825 years before Proclus died. So this would be about the year 1200. Imagine if we had an intellectual tradition that we were building on since the year 1200. Think of how firmly in place that would be. You know, modern science has only been around for around 300 years, 350 years. The presuppositions of science have only been relatively recent in the history of humankind. So this is a much longer tradition. And of course, people who were working in this tradition knew it well. They believed in it. They made truth claims. They told others about it. And as Christianity developed with the notion of logos, of course, these Neoplatonistic philosophers were probably saying, hey, that's not quite what we mean, right? No, you've got it wrong. You've taken this very precise philosophical concept that we've had and you've applied it somewhat metaphorically. Rather the way philosophers have for a long time attacked religion. Certainly was true in the 19th century when we had the development, certainly in Germany, that said that, particularly in the Hegelian school, and the right-wing Hegelians, that the representations of Christianity must be taken up philosophically, and if you take them up philosophically, you can see their truth. They are true, but in order to uncover that truth, you have to understand these things philosophically. So who knows exactly how all of these conversations took place? Perhaps someone knows this deeply. My desire in these lectures have just been to give you a flavor of the fact that there is a Neoplatonic tradition, a Middle Platonistic tradition, an academy tradition, and that these people had definite things to say, they communicated with each other, and that their thought was important in the ancient world and for the development of Christianity. Well, as Alexandrian Neoplatonism came under attack, and we of course know that it did, burning in the library, right, in Alexandria, Athens now became the center. Plotinus was in Rome, if I'm remembering. I think so. Proclus is the thinker we're talking about. He synthesized Plato, the Chaldean oracles. We saw that to be rather strange stuff, maybe by our standards. Orphic poems. And he called himself, and every philosopher, a priest of the entire universe, right? Because the entire universe is in a sense God, and one who knows this is a priest of that God. He serves that God, and by pointing out to all that the universe has this divine dimension. He's a very rigorous thinker. His thought was the culmination of Neoplatonism. All things emanate from the one. Well, we've heard this one before, haven't we? All things emanate from the one, including the gods, the demons. These are these halfway figures, you know, lower than gods, higher than human beings and the material world. Nous, or mind, is the culmination of the acts of the one. Now Proclus goes on and identifies the demiurge and the one. So he's really moving to understand the Platonic tradition in a way that makes it very clear that it's all, in some sense, a manifestation, emanation, transformation of the one. Well, in order to understand Proclus, we might compare Proclus to Plotinus. Plotinus said that the nous proceeds directly from the one. Proclus says that, no, through thought, the one itself is nous. So Plotinus says the nous proceeds from the one. Proclus says that through thought, the one is the nous. So now, remember, for Plotinus, we have nous coming from one. So there is this distinction. But in some sense, the nous is the one. Well, with Proclus, this becomes more of an identity than a difference. Through thought, nous itself is one. Now, for Plotinus, nous is prior to thought, right? Because you have to have a mind in order to think. And thought is the principle by which nous is alienated from itself, and in so doing, it goes over into world, soul, and out into materiality. But for Proclus, the movement from the unity of the one into the multiplicity of nous and life can return into the Godhead itself. So it's almost a deeper identity he's pushing here between one and nous and world soul than was pushed in Plotinus. That's very general things I'm saying. Proclus starts with the primary monad, which is one in itself. And the monad goes out into a trinity of limit. And this is interesting. Unlimit and mixture. Do all of you see the echoes here of the limit and the unlimit back in the original monad and indefinite dyad of Plato? See how it returns? It's like this wonderful composition, musical composition, where you hear it'd be like an overture of an opera, right? Where you hear the motifs that will become later, that they'll appear later in the opera. You hear them in the overture. And in the end, you hear them recapitulating. So here Proclus is at the end of the opera, right? And he's picking up some of these motifs in the tradition and putting them together in creative ways. Thought culminates life and is the fulfillment of being. Being is at the beginning, gives rise to thinking. The being at the beginning is thought which thinks. Well, that makes sense. In thinking, thought which thinks is itself thought. Okay, in thinking, thought which thinks is itself thought, and this is pure thinking, a return of being unto itself. Yeah, you'll have to think about that. Thought which thinks is itself thought, which is pure thinking, and so then you have an identity of being and thinking, and a return of being unto itself. Thought, which now is figured as being, gives rise to its negative, which is thinking. Thought gives rise to its negative, which is thinking. Okay? The thought it is produces its precise reflection, which is pure thinking. And this reflection is a manifestation of the deity that is within the fluctuating arena of the individual souls. We're only seeing a glimpse of this. It's like seeing a little bit of an iceberg tip where it's all underwater. You know, we would have to spend a lot of time with Proclus to get even a sense of what he's doing here. But we'll continue to say a couple words about him and then we'll sum up this lecture. Being is eternal because it always returns to itself as being. Becoming is the process of being, moving from what it is to what it is not. Well, I hope some of you have read a little bit of Hegel, right? And Hegel has being. He wants us to abstract away all modifications of being. And when you abstract away all modifications of being, right, you have no being in particular, which is non-being or nothingness. And then, of course, for Hegel, the conceptual distance between being and non-being, being goes over into itself in non-being, but the conceptual difference between non-being and being is becoming, which takes up the antipodes of non-being and being, right? Well, this is a little bit of an adumbration, maybe, of this. Becoming, for Proclus, is the process of being moving from what it is to what it is not. I mean, I just find this interesting. I'm sure people have done massive studies of this. Our very last thinker is a great Christian thinker that had unbelievable influence on Western thought. And indeed, some of you may not realize this, but the second most quoted figure, I hope I'm right on this, after Aristotle in Aquinas is Pseudo-Dionysius. Quotes him all the time. And he quotes Augustine a lot too. I'm trying to remember. Oh well, it doesn't really matter. The degree to which Pseudo-Dionysius is still in play in the Summa and in Aquinas' works is just very fascinating to me. Pseudo-Dionysius wrote probably in the late 5th century, clearly known by the 6th. He was commenting upon a Platonic tradition that had already become fixed now as ancient teaching, so he's going back about 900 years to Plato, right? 850. He says that God, is above all distinctions. Well, that's like the one that is transcendent. I think back to our good friend Speusippus here, and others that we've seen where the one is beyond predication. God transcends the means humans have to grasp God. Okay? So, of course, when we say something of God, we're saying what God is not, because God is above all predication. So any predication of God, by definition, is saying what God is not. And of course, this is all part and parcel of the Christian tradition. I don't know if you realize this. I hope you do. But that in classical Christian theology, of course, God is one, for Aquinas, for instance, simple, so that when we predicate things of God, we're not really picking out properties of God that exist, attached to God. We are using language in a way to talk about the absolute simple, which is God. We could use the word good or being. We could use these words to talk about this simple. So God transcends the means humans have to grasp God. And his notion of the Trinity has been likened to Proclus. So, what we've done here in these lectures is give you, hopefully, some sense of what Neoplatonic philosophy was, Middle Platonism, and the Academy tradition coming out of Plato. And perhaps this will give you some kind of sense that there was a lot going on intellectually. And if you're plowing through a patristic text and you don't know what's going on, and it seems like the guys are saying things you don't exactly know what they're presupposing or talking about, it may well be that they're in a Neoplatonic world here. Maybe it's the distance from that world to this world that makes sometimes these texts so hard to understand. So thank you for joining us today. We'll be back later, and we're going to start our next lectures where we're going to look at Aristotle. Particularly, we'll be looking deeply at the categories of Aristotle. Okay? We'll see you next time. Thank you.